What's up, webheads? I'm Steven from the Hills Maniacs, and today I'm going to be reviewing the final movie in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, Spider-Man 3. Let me just cut right to the chase and say that I didn't really think Venom needed to be in this movie because they introduced it at the near the beginning of the movie. You know, the Venom symbiote falls out of the sky, out of an asteroid or whatever, and ends up getting on Peter Parker, which turns his Spider-Man suit black and makes him more aggressive and everything else. Now, while that was we got to see a different side of Peter, I didn't really think Venom necessarily needed to be in this movie. And then later on, of course, it gets on Eddie Brock and everything else, and you have that whole setup for him versus Eddie. But even that part of it with Venom in it was like he was on Eddie Brock for like maybe 15 minutes in this whole movie. So it wasn't even like we didn't get a long time to actually see Venom against Spider-Man and everything else. And I know originally I've heard that like Sam Raimi didn't even want to include Venom in this movie in the first place, and I guess the studio kind of made him do that. I mean, I feel like if they had done Venom a different way or gone a different direction with how it played out in this movie, then maybe it would have been a little bit better. Venom was just kind of almost like a side villain in this because you have the whole thing with Harry wants to kill Peter. We see that like right at the beginning of the movie. Peter leaves Mary Jane's performance at a theater. He leaves the theater and then gets attacked by Harry on the new Goblin suit and everything else, and ends up, hurting Harry when they fight. Instead, Harry's like in the hospital recuperating for most of the movie, like he lost his memory and everything else. You have all that going on and that kind of tension between him and Harry with their friendship, and then you have Peter's kind of still kind of struggling to keep up with his relationship with Mary Jane, because like he's becoming more famous now and she's losing her job, so she feels like he's kind of overshadowing her a little bit, and he's kind of selfish about it, like well, when I'm Spider-Man and I'm famous and everything else, like this is what I do to get through it, and she's kind of taking that as him being selfish, so he's dealing with that. And then you have the Flint Marko Sandman stuff that they threw in there, where you find out that Flint Marko was actually the one that killed his Uncle Ben. So they had all these different moving parts, plus they included Venom in this. Like, I almost feel like they didn't need Venom, but a better way they could have done Venom, because they included him in this movie, was maybe have the Venom symbiote get on Harry Osborn, like maybe right off the bat, or have it be like it's in Oscorp in like some kind of secret like testing lab or testing facility or something. They found a symbiote and they've been testing it, and Harry goes there looking for a new weapon he can use against Peter, because he knows every time he fights Peter throughout this movie, like he loses. So like maybe this is his way. Like, let's say in this version, he fights Peter a lot more than like the one or two times he fights him in this movie. He keeps trying and keeps failing, so he needs something new to fight Peter with other than his father's technology, like the Green Goblin stuff. And he goes down to the lab and finds the symbiote, which attaches to him. I feel like Harry is the one who's out for vengeance the most in this movie. He wants to kill Peter and Spider-Man and everything else, so if he would have gotten the symbiote in this movie, I feel like it would have maybe done a better job and shown that like Harry's struggling. He doesn't really want to hurt Peter, but the Venom symbiote, kind of takes over, and as they mentioned in the movie, it kind of enhances people's like rage and everything else, or however they're feeling inside. It like enhances that even further. And we see that with Eddie Brock wanting revenge on Peter, Peter wanting revenge on Flint Marko, so he like basically kills him, So I think that would have made a better story with that. It's like Harry he doesn't want to kill Peter, but he thinks he has to, and the Venom symbiote kind of makes him. Then you get the internal struggle with Harry trying to deal with the symbiote instead of Peter. And then by the end of the movie, maybe they have it where Harry finally does find out that his father was actually killed by his own glider. He comes to the realization where like, okay, so I don't need to kill Peter. So then maybe he gets rid of the symbiote and then they fight. Or the end of the movie, maybe they're like fighting and then he stops or whatever. I don't know how they would have made it work exactly if they took out like the Eddie Brock stuff entirely. But I just feel like Venom would have been better on Harry Osborn. Now, with that out of the way, though, I did like how the movie still continued all the other story plots and everything else still continued from the previous one. Like they still, like I said, had the tension with Harry and Peter, had the relationship issues with Peter and MJ and things like that. I just feel like there was too much stuff going on with this, and this might be why it was a lot of people's least favorite of all the Spider-Man movies. You know, it got the lowest score, I think, on like Rotten Tomatoes and stuff too, I believe. I think everyone says Spider-Man 2 was like far better than this one. And that's what I didn't think it was a bad movie necessarily, and they still did a good job of showing us that more grounded side, like I've mentioned in the previous two movies, with like how we can still relate to Peter struggling with all this stuff. Like his best friend wants to kill him. He's having struggles keeping up, his relationship with his girlfriend and everything else. Like we can all relate to that, and this movie continued that trend, but it also threw in all these unnecessary things. Like I didn't think Eddie Brock, not just Venom, not just the Venom symbiote alone, but like I feel like Eddie Brock in general didn't need to be in this movie necessarily. They could have done away with that and maybe even done away with the Sandman stuff. Like that, we didn't really need that plot in here. I feel like it should have, come full circle and been a closure to the Harry and Peter situation. Like Harry wants to kill Peter. So like maybe even if the Venom stuff wasn't even included, I feel like what they could have done was maybe have like Harry hires all these other villains or something, like maybe even street level villains, I don't know, like Shocker or somebody we haven't seen yet that Peter has been putting away off screen or something. Like Harry starts recruiting all these people to track down and kill Spider-Man because he can't do it himself. And then throughout the movie, all these different villains keep coming at him and Peter keeps beating them. And then at the end, you have the climactic battle with Harry and Peter or something. And then you still have Harry find out at the end that that his father wasn't killed by Spider-Man. I feel like that's got a more interesting plot as well. And it would kind of add that maybe a bit of mystery to it, like, because Peter would be trying to figure out who's sending all these villains after him, especially if they would keep the whole Peter and Harry fight at the beginning, where, like, Harry hits his head and then he forgets things for most of the movie, so, like, you could have that play into it, where, like, he doesn't remember that he's the one hiring all these criminals to go after Peter, and then maybe they go after Harry and Peter saves Harry, or maybe they go after Harry because he doesn't pay them because he doesn't remember, and then Peter has to save Harry. I mean, there's so many different ways they could have gone with that, but I feel like they put too much in this movie that they already had, and that they kind of went away a little bit from the main focus of it, which, like I said, this should have been the conclusion of Harry's story arc, which it still kind of was, but like he got redeemed at the end when he helps Peter. I feel like Harry should have just been the main villain of this movie. Like maybe they could have kept the Flint Marko Sandman stuff in there. But other than that, I mean, I still think it was a good movie. Still a memorable, or still a nice conclusion to the Spider-Man trilogy. It did bring everything together well. Even with, if you ignore all the fights and the actual villains that are in this and everything else, like all those things, the Eddie Brock stuff, and just focus on the main relationships that we've been focusing on from the first two movies, then it still concludes all that nicely. So yeah, that's kind of all I have to say about this. If you take out some things from this movie and like if they had gone a different direction with it, then maybe it would have been maybe a lot better than it was. It wasn't entirely a bad movie. Like, it's not, I'll be talking about The Amazing Spider-Man 2, which like everybody hates on, and it kind of had a convoluted plot. I'll talk about that when I get to that one. But this one wasn't bad. I do recommend, if you haven't seen any of the original Spider-Man movies, I do recommend going back and watching all three of them because they are all great and they do have a continuous, like, flowing narrative throughout. So if you haven't seen those, go check those out. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. Did you enjoy Spider-Man 3 when you first saw it? Do you think it could have gone differently and been a better movie? Let me know that down in the comments section. Also, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more. Every week, I'm going to have at least one video where I review each of the live-action Spider-Man movies as we head towards Spider-Man No Way Home coming out, and that will be included as well. So keep an eye out for those every week if you're a fan of all the Spider-Man live-action movies, as well as the MCU movies and things like that. Next week, I'll be continuing this series by reviewing the first Amazing Spider-Man movie. There were obviously only 2 of those. That wasn't a trilogy, so that'll only be 2 weeks of that. The week after, I'll talk about Amazing Spider-Man 2. So thank you for watching the video, everyone, and I'll see you in the next one.
Subscribe.